Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala eventually allowed them to enter into the Holy Land after 40 years. And Dawood alayhi salam establishes the state of Israel, the first Islamic state, and establishes Jerusalem as the capital of the first Islamic state. And he is succeeded by his son Sulaiman, Nabi Sulaiman alayhi salam. And he builds the masjid in the capital city of the Islamic State. And when you read the story in the Qur'an of Sulaiman alayhi salam and the Queen of Sheba, read between the lines, and you'll see in that story the recognition of the state of Israel as the ruling state in the world. And the definition of a ruling state is that it can impose its will on any rival. And so this is the golden age of Banu Israel, the time of Nabi Dawood alayhi salam and Nabi Sulaiman alayhi salam. But after the death of Sulaiman alayhi salam, then there was rivalry. We don't have the time, I'm afraid, to go into those details. But I mentioned to you last December when I was here a very interesting book that you might want to read. It's entitled, Who Wrote the Bible? Who Wrote the Bible? It was written by an American scholar of the Bible who is recognized for his scholarship, a professor of Harvard. His name is Richard Friedman, and the book is sold for about $11, $12. In that book, Richard Friedman exposes for you all the fraud in the Bible, in the Torah, the rewriting of the Torah so many times. He's able to identify this writer, he wrote this passage and that passage and that passage and that passage. And this second writer, he wrote this passage and this passage and that passage. By comparing the writing, the style of the writing. He also explains why this rewriting of the Torah takes place. Because of rivalry between the descendants of Harun alayhi salam and the descendants of Musa alayhi salam. One of the things which were rewritten, of course, concerns the... You don't mind my mentioning it? Huh? The prohibition of riba. You still don't mention? Don't mind? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had prohibited riba in the Torah. They changed the Torah. They rewrote it. The Torah now says, you can find it, go look in it, you'll find it, it's still there. It is haram for a Jew to lend money on interest to another Jew. Rabbi, can you tell me why? Answer, don't rip off your own brother. That's why. It is haram for a Jew to lend money on interest to another Jew. But it is halal, he can lend money on interest to those who are not Jews. It's called double standards. It's called double standards. And it stinks. Because of this change they've made in the Torah concerning riba, among other things, they have now violated the condition of righteous conduct. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds to this. In Surah to Bani Israel, He refers to this as fasad. Fasad is corruption. This is the corruption of the word of Allah. لَتُفْسِدُنَّ فِي الْأَرْضِ مَرَّتَيْنِ وَقَضَيْنَا إِلَى بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ فِي الْكِتَابِ لَتُفْسِدُنَّ فِي الْأَرْضِ مَرَّتَيْنِ وَلَتَعْلُنَّ عُلُوًا كَبِيرًا. That we recorded it in the Torah, in the Zabur, in the Torah, that Banu Israel will commit fasad in the land, yani al-ardul muqaddasa, in the Holy Land, on 2 occasions. This is the first one. When the word of Allah is rewritten, corrupted. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responded to it by sending an army from Babylon. An army that worshipped the sun and the moon and the stars and idols. Ibadan lana, he says. And some Arabs have been saying to me, no, Imran, Allah will not refer to a people who are disbelievers as ibad. To which we respond with Surah Yasin, Ya hasratan ala al-ibad. Ya hasratan ala al-ibad. Ma ya'tihim min ayatin ila akhir al-ayah. So these ibad are sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they destroy the state of Israel. And they destroy the masjid. And they take Banu Israel into slavery in Babylon. And so now they're weeping by the rivers of Babylon. While they're out there in Babylon, however, a very important communication from Allah, which explains history, which explains politics, which explains the economy. And you're talking to someone who studied international relations, at the Graduate Institute of International Studies in Geneva, so I know something about the subject. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends a prophet, Isaiah. He sends many other prophets, but this one in particular, to communicate a divine promise. What is the promise? That Allah was going to send a prophet to Banu Israel, who would be their prophet, and who would be known as Al-Masih, the Messiah, and who, when he comes, will rule the world from the throne of Dawood alayhi salam, with a rule which will be eternal. The throne of Dawood alayhi salam is the state of Israel. It is Jerusalem. And so when the Messiah comes, he will rule the world from Jerusalem. Which is why Mr. Bush is so anxious to attack Iraq. Yes. You don't understand, eh? The Jews realized that if the Messiah is to rule the world from Jerusalem when he comes, and Jerusalem is under Babylonian occupation, then there are certain very simple logical deductions. Number one, the Messiah will have to liberate the Holy Land, which is now under Babylonian occupation. Number two, the Messiah will have to bring Banu Israel back to the Holy Land, not as tourists, but to reclaim it. Number three, the Messiah will have to restore the state of Israel in the Holy Land. And number four, that state of Israel, will have to become once again the ruling state in the world. And then the Messiah can rule the world from Jerusalem, from the throne of Dawood alayhi salam. In other words, when the Messiah comes, he will have to bring back the golden age, when the Jews rule the world. Shall I repeat that? When the Messiah comes, he will have to bring back the golden age, when the Jews rule the world. And so in the heart of every Jew, there is this absolute conviction that one day we will rule the world once again. And when we do that, we will rule forever.